I'm 33 and have been married to James for 5 years. We recently moved in with my immunocompromised mom to help care for her due to lupus. I'm writing because of an issue with my sister-in-law, Megan, that's left me feeling conflicted. When I was 19, I gave up my baby for adoption. The baby's father was abusive, and I escaped that relationship shortly before I found out I was pregnant. He's in prison for violent crimes against other women. At the time, I had untreated depression, substance abuse issues, and uncontrolled rage from my childhood trauma. I knew I wasn't in a place to raise a child safely. 14 years later, I've built a stable life. I got therapy, went to college, started a career, and met my husband. I've never regretted the adoption decision, though it was emotionally difficult. Megan is finishing her social work degree and has gotten involved in anti-adoption activism. She believes that with enough support, all mothers can keep their babies. I respect her passion, but her views feel too black and white. Last week, she asked to interview me for her college paper on mothers who were pressured into giving up their babies. I agreed, hoping to offer a more nuanced perspective. We did the interview yesterday while my husband and my mom were out. When she described her paper as adoption trauma, I felt uneasy because that wasn't what she'd originally said. She asked what support would have helped me keep my baby. I said no support would have changed my decision. I knew I would have been an abusive parent at 19. I still have panic attacks when children cry, and that would have made me dangerous. I explained this wasn't about housing or money. It was my choice to protect my child from me. I said adoption saved my child from my instability. Megan tried to steer me toward examples of institutional pressure that forced me into adoption. I repeated that it was my decision, and I stand by it. She stopped the recording and said, "I need examples of how the system failed you, not personal issues." I pointed out the agency provided counseling that let me decide for myself. She accused me of undermining her paper and left, saying I'd wasted her time. She told James I was protecting a predatory system. That evening, James told me I did nothing wrong, but said Megan texted him that I'd triggered her by defending the adoption industrial complex. She hasn't spoken to me and is venting to other family members. I understand Megan wants to fight coercive adoption practices, but her approach erases stories like mine, where giving up a child was an active, necessary choice. Not every adoption is about exploitation, and she won't accept that. This is putting strain on my relationship with my in-laws. My husband is on my side, but he's stressed. I wonder if I should have declined the interview or tried to be more tactful. But I also feel I need to protect my story and not let someone else rewrite it. I'm worried how Megan might portray me in her paper. Will she paint me as in denial or use my words out of context? She was sure I should feel a certain way, and when I didn't, she walked away. I love my husband and mostly get along with his family. This conflict over a decision I made years ago feels unnecessary. I'm tired of justifying a choice I know was right. I never expected to be in this position with my sister-in-law. I'm not sure what to do next. Thanks for reading. I'd appreciate any thoughts on whether I should try to smooth things over with Megan or keep my distance. Now for the first update. Hefter. Update. My SIL interviewed me about giving up my baby for adoption 14 years ago, then got angry when my honest answers didn't support her anti-adoption agenda. Hey everyone, I'm the one whose SIL tried to use my adoption experience for her anti-adoption paper. I want to sincerely thank you all for the support on my last post. It's been just over a week since I posted, and things have developed. After reading your comments, I showed James some of the responses supporting my decision to be honest. Seeing those responses helped him understand why his sister's approach was problematic. Throughout the week, Megan avoided contact with me. Not a text, not a call, not even an acknowledgement when we passed each other at my in-laws' Sunday dinner. She did send James several articles about adoption trauma and false consciousness among birth mothers who defend their oppressors. According to these articles, women like me are in denial and brainwashed by the adoption industrial complex. My mother-in-law called midweek and mentioned that Megan had been talking to extended family about me. She's been telling people that I'm in denial about being victimized by the adoption system and need intervention to recognize my trauma. My Mael seemed uncomfortable sharing this, but thought I should know. Edit. A lot of you asked about my biological child. I receive yearly updates through an open adoption arrangement. My child is now a teenager. Seeing those updates confirms that I made the right choice. Yesterday, James suggested inviting Megan over for dinner to try to resolve the tension. I was hesitant, but agreed because I knew it would only get worse if we didn't address it. Confrontation is a trigger for my PTSD from a previous abusive relationship, so I took time with my grounding exercises before she arrived. Dinner started awkwardly. Megan barely acknowledged me, focusing on her upcoming graduation and a regional activist conference she's organizing about family preservation. My mom observed while James tried to maintain conversation. After we'd eaten, James brought up the interview situation and said, "I hope we can clear the air about what happened with the interview." Megan dismissed my experience and said she'd found a better subject whose story actually illustrates the systemic problems with adoption. My mom asked Megan if she believed all mothers should keep their babies regardless of circumstances. Mom shared that she had briefly considered adoption for me when she had postpartum depression after my birth. Megan said that with proper support, all mothers can parent. She added that some people don't try hard enough. My hands trembled under the table. I described the recurring nightmares I had after giving birth, where I imagined harming my baby during crying spells. I explained that my therapist confirmed these were warning signs I shouldn't have ignored. Megan dismissed this, saying, "Those are just intrusive thoughts that all mothers have." The adoption industry uses normal anxieties to convince vulnerable women they're unfit mothers, but combined with my untreated mental health issues and addiction problems at the time, these weren't just normal new parent anxieties. My therapist confirmed this repeatedly. James stepped in and asked his sister if she believed it would have been better for a baby to stay with someone struggling with addiction and untreated mental health issues from abuse. I was grateful he intervened. Megan accused James of victim blaming and suggested my current stability proves I could have been just fine as a mother if the system hadn't convinced me I was broken. She kept using words like coercion and manipulation, as if I'd had no agency in my own decision. My mom tried to redirect the conversation, but then Megan said she had already written portions of her paper using me as an anonymous example of how birth mothers internalize adoption industry propaganda. I felt my experience was used without consent and misrepresented. I asked Megan to leave my experience out of her paper entirely and told her she had no right to use my story. The dinner ended shortly after that, with Megan gathering her things and leaving without resolving anything. As soon as she was gone, I had a panic attack I hadn't experienced in years. The confrontation reminded me of my past abusive relationship when someone tried to control my narrative and tell me what to think or feel. James held me through the panic attack, validated my feelings, and didn't make excuses for his sister. After I calmed down, he called his parents to express concern about Megan's behavior. They seem torn. They understand my perspective, but don't want to alienate their daughter. I've been considering whether I should contact Megan's professor or the ethics board at her university. Using someone's interview without consent and misrepresenting their experience seems to violate research ethics, but I'm worried about escalating the situation and causing more family drama. Several of you suggested Megan might have a personal connection to adoption, and I'm starting to wonder if that's true. Her intensity goes beyond academic interest. James doesn't know anything specific, but agreed it seems personal for her. I'm exhausted by this. I made this decision 14 years ago. I've processed it with professional help. I know it was right for me and my child. Having someone tell me I don't understand my own experience is infuriating and re-traumatizing. I'm taking things one day at a time with this Megan situation. I have an appointment with my therapist tomorrow to process what happened. I'll update if anything significant changes, especially if I decide to contact her university. Now, for the second update. First off, thank you all for the supportive comments on my last post. For those following my saga with my SIL, things have escalated. After that dinner I scheduled an appointment with my therapist. We discussed healthy boundaries and how to protect my narrative without getting pulled into Megan's activism. My therapist suggested that if I was concerned about the ethical implications of how Megan planned to use my interview, I should reach out to her professor directly. I considered it for a couple days, reading your comments. Many pointed out that universities have strict guidelines about research involving human subjects. I decided to draft an email to Megan's professor to ensure my story wouldn't be misrepresented in academic work. In the email, I explained who I was, how the interview came about, and my concerns that my experiences were being mischaracterized. I mentioned that no consent forms were signed and that I hadn't given permission for my story to be used as Megan described. I asked if there were guidelines students needed to follow when conducting interviews. The professor responded within 24 hours. She confirmed that students are required to follow ethical guidelines for interviews, including informed consent, accurate representation of subjects' words, and reviewing how information will be used. She said she would address this with Megan and that no improper research would count for credit. I forwarded the email to James so he'd know. He was supportive, but worried about how his sister would react. 2 days later, Megan showed up at our house unannounced. She arrived when James was at work, and I was home alone with my mom, who was napping upstairs after a rough morning with her lupus symptoms. I was sorting laundry when the doorbell rang several times. When I opened the door, Megan demanded to know why I went behind her back to her professor instead of talking directly. She pushed past me into the living room. I reminded myself I'm not that 19-year-old anymore and stood my ground. "You never signed a consent form," I said. "You're misrepresenting my experience to fit your narrative. That's not ethical research or respectful of what I shared." Megan paced and accused me of sabotaging her education and making it personal when it's about fighting a system. She held up her phone with the voice memo app recording. I was angry that she was trying to record without permission again. "Are you recording this?" I said. "That's the second time you've tried to use my words without consent." She didn't deny it and held her phone tighter. I asked her to delete the recording and leave our house, saying I wouldn't talk without James present and proper documentation of how my information would be used. Megan refused and raised her voice, accusing me of protecting a system that exploits women and saying I was blind to how I was manipulated. The commotion woke my mom, who called down asking if everything was okay. Then there was a thump. I saw her at the top of the stairs, unsteady. She lost her balance on the first step. I ran to the stairs and caught her before she fell. I helped her back to her bedroom. I was scared Megan might do something unpredictable, but my mom came first. I settled my mom in bed, explained we had an unexpected visitor, and promised tea once I handled the situation. When I returned, Megan was still in the living room, quieter. She had seen my caregiving responsibilities. I was drained, but tried again to explain. I said my adoption decision wasn't just about past trauma or mental health. It was about my future. Even at 19, I knew my mom's health would decline, and I would become her primary caretaker. I couldn't balance that with parenting, especially without support from the baby's father. Megan didn't argue and left without saying more. I thought seeing my mom's condition gave her perspective. By evening, James called. Megan had sent a group text to him and their parents, claiming I had ambushed her with the professor email and manipulated the situation by using my mother's illness to avoid accountability. She said I planned for my mother to almost fall down the stairs. Edit. When James called his parents about Megan's text, they revealed that Megan's college roommate had placed a baby for adoption and struggled with depression, with Megan as her main support. That explains her passion, but doesn't excuse her behavior. James was furious. He called his parents to give them the real version before Megan's narrative spread. His dad said Megan's behavior had gone too far. James insists on a full family meeting with his parents this weekend. He doesn't want me alone with Megan again, and I'm relieved. I'm exhausted by this ordeal. I made a decision 14 years ago, and I'm at peace with it. Having someone tell me I don't understand my own experience is frustrating. The meeting is this weekend at James's parents' house, so my mom doesn't have to be involved. I'm nervous, but ready to resolve this. I'm trying to stay compassionate despite everything with Megan. Thank you all for your support. Now for the final update. Final update to my SIL trying to use my adoption story for her anti-adoption agenda. Wow, can't believe it's over. First off, thank you all for your support and advice. So it's been about 2 weeks since the confrontation with Megan at my house, when she showed up unannounced and my mom almost fell down the stairs. The family meeting at my in-laws' place happened this past weekend, and it was intense. James and I arrived about 30 minutes early to get our thoughts together and talk with his parents before Megan showed up. His mom made coffee, and his dad seemed serious. They told us they'd been doing their own research about adoption ethics since James called them. trying to understand both perspectives. When Megan finally arrived, she carried a massive portfolio folder. She barely made eye contact with me and gave James a half hug before sitting across from me. James's dad started things off by saying we needed ground rules. Everyone would get uninterrupted time to speak, no recording devices allowed. Megan rolled her eyes, and we'd focus on moving forward rather than assigning blame. Megan tried to interject that this wasn't about blame, but about systemic issues, and his dad held up his hand until she stopped talking. James explained calmly but firmly why he was concerned about Megan's approach. He pointed out the boundary violations, trying to record without consent twice, showing up at our house unannounced, misrepresenting my experience, and sending that group text with false accusations. Megan fidgeted with her folder and tried to interrupt. When it was her turn, she opened her portfolio and started pulling out papers. She had printouts of studies about birth mother regret, statistics about adoption agency profits, and a highlighted copy of the email I sent to her professor. She launched into a rehearsed speech about how she wasn't attacking me personally, but fighting against a predatory system that profits from vulnerable women. To clarify, since many are asking, no, Megan never actually interviewed any other birth mothers, despite claiming she had a better subject at that dinner. Her professor confirmed she hadn't submitted any interview materials for her project yet. Her argument was that I couldn't possibly have made a free choice because I was young, traumatized, and unsupported. According to her, my continued defense of my decision was internalized oppression and trauma bonding with the system that exploited me. She used academic jargon to tell me I didn't understand my own life experience. I focused on my breathing. James's mom watched me, concerned I might have a panic attack. Instead, I felt calm and clear, and I realized what was happening. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice or get emotional. I talked about agency, personal agency. I explained that the most traumatic part of my abusive relationship had been having my choices taken away from me, and how making my own decision about adoption had been empowering. I told them about the yearly updates I received from my child's adoptive family, something I hadn't shared with anyone but James before. I talked about seeing pictures of this teenager who has opportunities I never had, who grew up in a stable home with parents who were ready to raise a child. Those updates confirm each year that I made the right choice. That was my choice, I said. Mine, not the agencies, not my parents, not the systems. Mine. And continuing to insist I couldn't possibly have known what I wanted is just another way of taking my agency away. Megan had no response. James's dad cleared his throat and shared that his older sister had placed a baby for adoption in the 1970s as a teenager. He explained how things were different then: closed adoptions, shame, secrecy. But his sister still maintained it was her choice and the right one. He told Megan that while advocating for better support for vulnerable mothers was admirable, using one woman's negative experience to invalidate another woman's positive experience contradicted her mission of empowering women. James's mom then asked Megan why this cause had become so important to her. Megan cried. Through her tears, she revealed what none of us knew. Her college roommate had placed a baby for adoption their sophomore year and had fallen into severe depression afterward. She'd said she felt pressured by the agency and regretted her decision, but her parents refused to let her seek out the child or talk about it. Suddenly, the reason for Megan's intensity was clear. She was fighting for her friend. Her passion came from witnessing someone's pain, even if her methods were wrong. James's mom sat beside Megan and put an arm around her. She acknowledged her friend's pain and pointed out that using one woman's negative experience to invalidate another woman's positive experience wasn't helping anyone. After that, we spent the next hour discussing how adoption practices have changed, how support for young mothers could improve without vilifying adoption, and how to respect different women's choices. Megan was still stubborn, but she listened more than she lectured. By the end of the meeting, we had clear boundaries. Megan agreed not to use any part of my story in her work without written permission. She acknowledged that showing up unannounced and trying to record me was inappropriate, and she committed to focusing her activism on expanding options and support for women in crisis pregnancies rather than eliminating adoption. The professor emailed me the next day to confirm that Megan had dropped that paper topic and was redirecting her research toward support systems for pregnant women in crisis. James and I went out for dinner after this and sat in silence for a while. He apologized for not setting boundaries with his sister sooner, and I admitted that part of me understood her passion, even if her approach was wrong. 2 days ago, Megan texted me directly, first time since this started, asking if I would meet her for coffee, just to talk, no agendas, no recording devices. I agreed to meet next week at a cafe near my therapist's office. I'm cautiously optimistic that we might build a better relationship. Not close friends, but peaceful family members who can respect each other's boundaries and experiences. Life after resolving this conflict with Megan has been peaceful. I've realized I'm stronger and more certain about my past decisions than I ever knew. Edit. For those wondering about my mom, she's doing much better now. The almost fall scared us both. Her doctor adjusted her medication and she has better mobility. James has been supportive, taking time off work to help with her care while I dealt with the situation. Marriage isn't always easy, but it's been helpful to have someone support me during family drama. Edit 2. To the person who DM'd me asking if I regret contacting the professor, I don't regret it. I'd do it again. Sometimes difficult actions lead to necessary conversations.